He thought her broken English meant a broken mind. Preston Calloway, a man whose signature moved markets and destroyed companies, sat in the VIP booth of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, laughing at the waitress struggling to pronounce his wine order. To him, she was invisible, a peasant suitable only for pouring Pinot Noir and disappearing. But Preston made a fatal calculation that night. He forgot that desperation sharpens the senses. He didn't realize that the woman he was mocking was reading the upside-down legal documents on his table faster than he was signing them. And she just found the clause that was about to end his life. The sound of a dropped fork in Le Miroir was more offensive than a scream. It was a place where the silence was expensive, curated by velvet drapes, thick carpets, and the hushed tones of men and women who owned the skyscrapers, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena Kovac smoothed the front of her stiff black uniform. Her hands were trembling, just a fraction, but she hid them behind the white serving cloth draped over her forearm. It was the third double shift in a row. Her feet felt like they were bleeding inside the cheap, non-slip shoes she had bought at a discount store in Queens. But physical pain was a luxury she couldn't afford to acknowledge. In her pocket, vibrating silently against her hip, was her phone. She knew what the notification was. It was the final notice from the medical billing department at Sinai Grace Hospital. Her daughter Maya needed the next round of respiratory therapy, and Elena was $3,000 short. Elena, table 4. Now, Henry, the floor manager, hissed, snapping his fingers near her ear. Henry was a small man with a thin mustache who believed that managing staff required the temperament of a prison warden. And fix your hair. You look like you just ran a marathon. Yes, Monsieur Henri, Elena said, her voice soft. The heavy Slavic accent wrapped around the vowels, making them sound thick and foreign. She kept her head down, acting the part. Table 4 was the power table. It was situated in the far corner, secluded enough for privacy, but visible enough that everyone in the room knew who was sitting there. Tonight, it was occupied by Preston Calloway. Everyone in New York knew Preston Calloway. He was the CEO of Calloway Venture, a private equity firm that specialized in distressed assets. In the papers, they called him a genius. On the street, they called him a vulture. He was 45, handsome in a shark-like way, with hair that was perfectly silvered at the temples, and a suit that cost more than Eleanor made in 2 years. Sitting opposite him was a younger man, sweaty and nervous, constantly adjusting his glasses. Elena recognized him from the reservation list. Gavin Mercer, a corporate attorney from a mid-tier firm, trying to punch above his weight. Elena approached the table with the practiced invisibility of a ghost. She carried the heavy tray with a bottle of Domaine de la Romane Conti and 2 crystal glasses. Told you, Gavin, the EPA report is a non-issue, Preston was saying, his voice booming slightly louder than necessary. He was a man who enjoyed the sound of his own authority. We bury the assessment in the acquisition cost. Once Calloway Venture owns the land, we rezone it. The environmental restrictions drop the moment the designation changes from protected wetland to mixed-use industrial. It's basic geography. I know, Preston, I know, Gavin stuttered, wiping his forehead with a linen napkin. It's just the liability clause. If the groundwater contamination is worse than the initial survey, the cleanup costs fall on the primary signatory. That's you. Preston laughed, a dry, barking sound. That's why we have insurance, Gavin, and why I pay you. Stop sweating, you're making the wine taste like desperation. Elena reached the table. She stepped into the pool of light cast by the chandelier, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Good evening, sirs, she said. She tried to enunciate clearly, but the thill sound in evening tripped her up, coming out closer to a D. Would you like to taste the wine? Preston didn't even look up at her. He waved a hand dismissively. Just pour it. And don't spill it. This bottle is worth more than your life. Elena flinched internally, but kept her face like stone. She uncorked the bottle with expert precision, a skill she had learned not in a hospitality school, but during long diplomatic dinners in her former life, a life that felt like a dream now. As she poured the dark ruby liquid into Preston's glass, she noticed the paperwork spread out between the bread basket and the butter dish. It was a chaotic mess of red lines and sticky notes. Most waitresses would see only blocks of boring text. But Elena's eyes involuntarily locked onto the header of the document facing her. It was upside down, but to her, it was legible. Merger agreement. Titan Holdings and North Creek Conservancy. She focused on the bottom of the page, where the signature block was waiting. Then her eyes darted to a small paragraph just above the signature line, labeled Section 14, Paragraph B, Indemnification of Proxy Entities. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew that clause. She hadn't seen it used since the Omega oil scandal in Eastern Europe 5 years ago. It wasn't standard. It was a trap. "Hey!" Preston snapped. Elena jumped, a single drop of red wine splashing onto the base of the wine glass. Not on the table, not on the suit, just the glass base. "I said pour it, not stare at it," Preston sneered, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, blue ice. He looked at her name tag, then up at her face, taking in the tired lines around her eyes and the cheap makeup. God, do they hire anyone who speaks proper English anymore? Or do we just have to guess what you're saying? "I apologize, sir," Elena said, bowing her head. "I was just checking the label." "Checking the label?" Preston turned to Gavin, grinning cruelly. "Did you hear that? The immigrant waitress is checking the label on a $20,000 bottle. Tell me, honey, can you even read French? Or do you just look at the pictures?" Gavin chuckled nervously, eager to please the billionaire. "She probably thinks it's grape juice, Preston." Elena gripped the bottle tighter. The insult burned, but it wasn't the cruelty that held her attention. It was the document. Preston Calloway was about to sign his life away, and he was too busy mocking her accent to read the fine print. The restaurant hummed with the clinking of silverware and the murmur of deals being struck. But for Eleanor, the world had narrowed down to the sneer on Preston Calloway's face. She took a step back, the bottle held securely against her chest. "I assure you, sir, I am familiar with the vintage," she said, her voice steady despite the heavy accent that turned vintage into vintage. 1997 was a volatile year for Burgundy. High heat in August, followed by early rain. The grapes had to be harvested quickly. Preston stopped swirling his glass. He blinked, the arrogance momentarily stalled by surprise. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Then the surprise curdled back into amusement. "Listen to that," he scoffed, turning back to Gavin. She memorized the cheat sheet Henry gives the staff, like a parrot. "Very good, Polly. You want a cracker?" Gavin laughed louder this time, relieved the target of Preston's aggression wasn't him. "Good one, Preston." "It's not a cheat sheet," Elena said. She shouldn't have spoken. She knew the rules. Invisibility is survival. But the arrogance of this man, combined with the dangerous legal text she had just glimpsed, pushed her past her limit. "It is fact." Preston's expression darkened. He didn't like the furniture talking back. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold money clip, peeling off a $100 bill. He crumbled it into a ball and tossed it onto the table, right next to the dirty bread plate. "Here's a fact for you," Preston said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I don't pay for conversation. I pay for service. You take this, you go back to the kitchen, and you send someone over who doesn't sound like they just crawled out of a shipping container. Understand? The insult hit Eleanor like a physical slap. She felt the heat rise up her neck. A shipping container. If only he knew. She hadn't come in a container. She had come on a visa that had expired 3 years ago when the regime change back home froze her assets and flagged her passport. She was a ghost in America, a woman who had once lectured on international contract law at the University of Kiev, now reduced to a caricature of poverty by a man who likely hadn't read a book since college. She looked at the crumpled bill. It was 3 hours of wages. It was medicine for Maya. Slowly, Elena reached out. Her hand hovered over the money. That's it, Preston grinned, taking a sip of the wine. Know your place. She picked up the bill, but she didn't pocket it. She smoothed it out on the table, pressing it flat with her palm until the face of Benjamin Franklin looked up at the ceiling. I will get your manager, sir, she said quietly. But before I go, you should be careful with ink. Preston frowned. What? Ink, she repeated, gesturing vaguely to the table. It smudges, especially on page 14. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had said too much. Why had she said that? Back at the table, Preston watched her go, annoyance radiating off him. Insolent, he muttered. I'm having Henri fire her tonight. Forget her, Preston, Gavin said, tapping the document. We need to sign this before the Asian markets open. If the news of the acquisition leaks, the stock price of North Creek will jump, and the deal is dead. Preston turned his attention back to the paperwork. He picked up his Mont Blanc fountain pen. The weight of it felt good in his hand. This deal was his masterpiece. He was acquiring a massive tract of land in upstate New York for pennies on the dollar, ostensibly for conservation, but in reality to build a massive server farm that would power his new AI venture. The sellers, a group of old money families represented by Gavin, were desperate for cash. He flipped to the signature page. Just sign here and initial the bottom of each page, Gavin said, sliding the stack closer. His finger tapped the paper rhythmically. Preston signed his name with a flourish on the first page. He flipped to the second, then the third. He reached page 14. Ink. It smudges. Especially on page 14. The waitress's broken English echoed in his head. It was absurd. She was a nobody. But something about the way she had smoothed out that bill, the precision of her fingers, the sudden defiance in her eyes, made him pause. What is it? Gavin asked, his voice tightening. Nothing, Preston muttered. He looked at page 14. It looked standard. Section 14. Liabilities. It was a dense wall of text, single-spaced, size 10 font. Legalese designed to make eyes glaze over. Preston started to initial the corner, but his hand stopped. There was a phrase in the middle of the block, wherein the assignee, Callaway Venture, assumes full and retroactive criminal liability for all pre-existing subsurface toxic deposits, regardless of prior disclosure, holding the assignor, North Creek, harmless in all federal inquiries. Preston narrowed his eyes. He wasn't a lawyer, but he was a shark. He knew criminal liability was not something you assumed. You assumed financial liability. You paid fines. You didn't go to jail for what the previous owners buried. Gavin, Preston said slowly, not looking up. Yes, Preston? Why does this say criminal liability instead of civil indemnification? Gavin's face went pale. What? No, that's standard boilerplate. It's archaic phrasing. It means the same thing. Does it? Preston looked up. Because usually, if I assume criminal liability for something I didn't do, I go to prison, and you get your commission. Preston, you're paranoid. The waitress got in your head. Just sign it. We have a deadline. Gavin's hand was shaking now. Preston looked toward the kitchen doors. The waitress, Elena, was standing there, peering through the small circular window. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with expectation. She knew. How the hell did she know? Preston closed the folder. "I need to use the restroom." "Preston, the courier is waiting," I said. Preston stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I need to use the restroom. Don't touch the papers, Gavin." Preston walked across the dining room. He didn't go to the restroom. He walked straight to the kitchen swing doors and pushed through. The kitchen was a chaotic symphony of shouting chefs, clattering pans, and steam. Henry was standing near the pass, screaming at a line cook about undercooked scallops. Elena was in the corner, scraping leftovers into a bin. Preston marched right up to her, ignoring the startled looks of the kitchen staff. The air smelled of truffle oil and dish soap. "You," Preston said, pointing at her. Elena froze. Henry rushed over, looking terrified. "Mr. Calloway, I am so sorry. Is she bothering you? I was just about to terminate her shift. Elena, get out!" "Shut up, Henry," Preston barked, never taking his eyes off Elena. "You." "The waitress. Who are you?" Elena wiped her hands on her apron. She stood tall, despite the exhaustion. "I am Eleanor, sir. I serve tables." "Don't lie to me." Preston stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You saw the contract. You read Clause 14b, from upside down, in the dark, while pouring wine." Elena looked around. The chefs were watching. Henry was gaping. "I have good eyes, Mr. Calloway," she said simply. "That clause," Preston hissed. "What does it mean? Not the legal definition, the real meaning. Why did you warn me?" Eleanor hesitated. This was the precipice. She could play dumb, get fired, and go home to her sick daughter with nothing. Or she could step off the ledge. "Because, Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice dropping the feigned subservience, though the accent remained. "If you sign that, Mr. Mercer will not just take your money. He will take your freedom. The land you are buying is not a conservation site. It is a Class A Superfund site. They buried lead and mercury there in the 80s. The EPA is launching a federal indictment next week. That contract transfers the target from the sellers to you." The kitchen went silent. Even the sizzling of the steaks seemed to stop. Preston stared at her. His mind raced. It fit. The rush to sign. The low price. Gavin's sweating. "How do you know this?" Preston whispered. "Because," Eleanor said, her eyes hard and cold. "I wrote the original defense strategy for the company that dumped the waste, 10 years ago, in Ukraine, before the company rebranded to North Creek." Preston Calloway, the billionaire who knew everything, stood speechless in a greasy kitchen, realizing that the woman he had treated like garbage was the only person in the room who wasn't trying to bury him. "Henry," Preston said, without looking at the manager. "Yeah, yes, sir." "Get us a table, a private one, in the office." "Sir." "And bring the bottle of Romane Conti. Elena isn't serving it." Preston looked at her. "She's drinking it with me." The office of the restaurant manager was cramped, smelling faintly of stale cigars and lemon polish. It was a stark contrast to the dining room's opulence. But for the first time that evening, Preston Calloway didn't care about aesthetics. He sat on the edge of a cheap leather desk chair, the bottle of Domaine de la Romane Conti sitting uncorked on top of a stack of invoices. Elena sat opposite him on a folding metal chair. She still wore her uniform, the black dress, the white apron stained with a speck of sauce. But her posture had changed. The slump of the exhausted servant was gone. She sat with a straight spine, her legs crossed at the ankles, hands folded in her lap. It was the posture of a woman who was used to sitting in boardrooms, not break rooms. "Henry," Preston said, without turning his head toward the door where the terrified manager hovered. "Get out. And if anyone disturbs us, you're fired." The door clicked shut. Silence filled the small room, heavy and thick. Preston poured wine into 2 water tumblers he had grabbed from a shelf. He slid one across the desk to Eleanor. "Drink," he ordered. "It costs more than this restaurant makes in a week." Elena took the glass but didn't drink. She swirled the liquid, watching the legs of the wine drip down the glass. "You didn't bring me here to drink, Mr. Calloway. You brought me here because you are frightened." Preston laughed, a short, sharp bark. "I don't get frightened. I get angry. And right now, I'm angry that my lawyer, a man I pay 7 figures a year, tried to sell me a toxic landfill wrapped in a pretty contract, but I need to know why." He leaned forward, his blue eyes boring into hers. "Who is Elena Kovac? Because you aren't just a waitress who reads upside down. That clause, Section 14B, it's specific, it's nasty. It's the kind of legal poison pill that only a handful of people in the world know how to structure." Elena took a slow sip of the wine. It was exquisite, tasting of cherries and old earth, a taste from a life she thought she had lost forever. "My name is Eleanor," she said softly. "But 10 years ago, in Kiev, my last name was different. I was the senior legal analyst for the Ministry of Energy. Before the coup. Before the sanctions." Preston's eyes widened slightly. "You handled the gas transit contracts." "I wrote them," she corrected, her voice gaining strength. "When the state-owned companies wanted to privatize assets without taking on the Soviet-era debts, they needed a mechanism, a way to separate the asset from the liability legally, but keep them connected financially. I created the indemnification of proxy entities. Structure. It was designed to protect the state, not to defraud investors. But, like all tools, it can be used as a weapon." She set the glass down. "Gavin Mercer is not smart enough to write that clause, Mr. Calloway. He copy-pasted it. He stole my work from an old international law journal, but he didn't understand the trigger mechanism. If you had signed that, the EPA indictment wouldn't just fine your company. It would trigger a piercing of the corporate veil. They would have come for your personal assets, your homes, your accounts, everything." Preston sat back, exhaling a long breath. He ran a hand through his silver hair. He looked at this woman, this waitress with cracked hands and cheap shoes, and realized she was the most dangerous person he had met in a decade. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you here? Why are you serving pasta to idiots like Gavin if you can write circles around the DOJ?" Elena looked down at her hands. The defiance cracked, just for a second, revealing the mother underneath. "Because in America, my degree is paper," she whispered. "Because I have no references. Because my husband is gone. And because my daughter, Maya, has cystic fibrosis." She looked up, her eyes wet but fierce. "The medication costs $4,000 a month. The insurance from this job covers 20%. I work 3 jobs, Mr. Calloway. I don't have time to study for the bar exam. I don't have the money for the application fees. I have to keep Maya breathing. That is my only contract now." The room fell silent again. Preston Calloway was a man known for his ruthlessness. He had fired people on Christmas Eve. He had liquidated family-owned businesses for profit. But he respected one thing above all else: leverage. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. He unscrewed his Mont Blanc pen, the same one he had almost used to sign his death warrant. "How much?" he asked. "To cover the medical bills, for a year." Elena looked at the checkbook. It would be so easy. She could take the money. She could sleep. She could quit this job. But she shook her head. Preston paused. "You're refusing." "I am not a beggar, Mr. Calloway," Elena said, her voice hard. "And you are not a charity. If you give me money, I am in your debt." "I do not want your charity." "Then what do you want?" "I want to finish what I started at table 4, Elena said. "Gavin Mercer tried to destroy you tonight. He thinks he succeeded. He thinks you are in the bathroom, panicking, and that you will come out and sign because you trust him." She leaned forward, her face illuminated by the harsh desk lamp. "I want to come with you. Tomorrow. To the closing meeting. I want to be the one who tears his contract apart. I want a job, Mr. Calloway. Not as a waitress. As a consultant, you pay me a salary, a real salary, and I will save you $50 million by tomorrow noon." Preston stared at her. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found a hunting partner. "You have a uniform," he said, gesturing to her black dress. "We need to get you a suit." Elena stood up. "I have a suit. It is 10 years old, but it is Italian." "Good." Preston stood up and extended his hand. "Be at Calloway Venture Tower at 8 a.m. Don't be late. And Eleanor?" "Yes." "Tomorrow you don't have to worry about your accent. Tomorrow you let the sharks know there's a killer whale in the water." The conference room at Calloway Venture was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended 50 floors above Manhattan. It smelled of fresh coffee and fear. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Gavin Mercer. He looked refreshed, confident. He had his team of junior associates with him, all of them arranging stacks of files with military precision. Across from them sat the representatives from North Creek Conservancy, 3 older men in tweed suits who looked like harmless grandfathers, but had the eyes of poker players. Preston Calloway walked in at 8:05 a.m. He was alone. "Preston!" Gavin stood up, flashing a bright, predatory smile. "We were getting worried. Did you have a rough night? You left the restaurant rather abruptly." "I had a stomach ache," Preston said breezily, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Something I ate. Maybe the wine." "Well, we're all set," Gavin said, sliding a fresh copy of the merger agreement across the polished wood. "The North Creek team has agreed to your terms on the price. All we need is the signature on the finalized draft. Same as last night, just cleaned up." Preston looked at the document. He didn't touch it. "Actually, Gavin," Preston said, checking his watch, "I realized something last night. I've been relying on you too much. A CEO should always have a second opinion, don't you think?" Gavin's smile faltered. "A second opinion? Preston, we've been working on this for 6 months. Who could possibly—" The heavy double doors at the back of the room opened. Elena walked in. She was unrecognizable from the woman who had poured wines the night before. The messy bun was gone, replaced by a sleek, sharp bob that framed her face like a helmet. She wore a charcoal grey suit, clearly older, perhaps a bit out of fashion, but tailored to perfection. She carried no bag, no files, just a single yellow legal pad. She didn't look at the floor. She walked with a terrifying, rhythmic clicking of heels against the marble floor. "Gentlemen," she said. Her voice was calm, authoritative. The accent was there, but it no longer sounded broken. It sounded exotic, dangerous. "Who is this?" Gavin demanded, laughing nervously. "Preston, isn't this the waitress from Le Miroir?" The North Creek representatives exchanged confused glances. "This," Preston said, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers, "is my external audit consultant, Ms. Elena Kovacs. She specializes in international liability and distressed assets. She's here to review Section 14B. The color drained from Gavin's face so fast it looked like a magic trick. Elena didn't sit. She walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room. She picked up a black marker. "Mr. Mercer," Elena said, not turning around as she wrote a date on the board, October 14th, 1988. "Are you familiar with this date?" I don't know what you're talking about," Gavin stammered. "Preston, this is a farce. She serves food. She's not a lawyer." Elena turned around. Her eyes were cold steel. October 14th, 1988, was the day the EPA classified the bedrock under North Creek as a Tier 1 hazmat zone, a classification that was conveniently buried under 3 layers of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. She threw the marker onto the table. It slid and hit Gavin's water glass with a clink. The contract you want Mr. Calloway to sign contains a retroactive assumption of criminal negligence, Elena continued, pacing slowly toward Gavin. You drafted it using the Odessa Protocol, a legal structure used to launder liability. It transfers the prison sentence from the seller to the buyer. One of the North Creek representatives stood up. This is preposterous. We are selling a nature preserve. You are selling a graveyard, Elena snapped, slamming her hand down on the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. And you, Mr. Mercer, are not working for Calloway Venture, because no lawyer would expose his client to 20 years in federal prison unless he was being paid by someone else. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It wasn't a legal document. It was a printout of a flight manifest she had found online at 4 a.m., using the restaurant's Wi-Fi and her old contacts. Tell me, Gavin, she said softly, looming over him. Why did you fly to the Bahamas last weekend on a private jet owned by Brockton Enterprises, Preston's biggest competitor? The room exploded into chaos. The North Creek men started gathering their papers, looking for an exit. Preston sat perfectly still, a smile playing on his lips. Gavin looked around, trapped. Sweat was pouring down his face. Preston, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. Brockton, they just offered me a ride. It was a coincidence. A coincidence, Preston mused. Like the coincidence of you missing the criminal liability clause, or the coincidence that Brockton has been trying to buy my company for 3 years. Preston stood up. He walked over to Eleanor and stood beside her. You're fired, Gavin, Preston said calmly. And after Ms. Kovac is done filing the ethics complaint with the New York Bar Association, you won't be able to practice law in a food court, let alone a courtroom. Security. 2 large guards entered the room. They hauled a sputtering, protesting Gavin out of the room. The North Creek representatives scurried out behind him, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. When the doors closed, only Preston and Elena were left. The silence was different now. It wasn't tense, it was electric. Preston looked at the white board, then at Elena. He saw the tremor in her hand, the adrenaline wearing off. He saw the mother who had just gambled everything and won. You were right, Preston said. You saved me $50 million. Actually, probably more. You saved the company. I did my job, Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. Now, about my payment. The job is yours, Preston said. Legal consultant, $150,000 a year. Benefits, full medical. Starting today. Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her so powerfully she almost collapsed. Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I will... But, Preston interrupted, holding up a finger. I have one more condition. Elena froze. Condition? We aren't done, Preston said, walking to the window and looking out at the city. Gavin was just a pawn. Brockton Enterprises is the king. They tried to kill me. I don't just want to survive, Elena. I want to hit back. I want to buy them. He turned to her, his eyes burning with ambition. You know how to hide liability. Do you know how to find it? Do you know how to find the skeletons in Brockton's closet? Elena thought of Maya, waiting at home with her nebulizer. She thought of the years of humiliation, the managers who shouted at her, the customers who mocked her English. She thought of the power she had just felt, destroying a man like Gavin with nothing but words. She straightened her jacket. A dark, determined look crossed her face. Mr. Calloway, she said, give me a laptop and access to their public filings. I will find you a skeleton by lunch. Good, Preston grinned. But first, let's get you some coffee. Real coffee. not the swill you served at Le Miroir. It seemed like a victory. But neither of them knew that Gavin hadn't just been working for Brockton. The conspiracy went deeper, and as Eleanor logged into her new computer, she didn't realize that by destroying Gavin, she had just alerted a much bigger, much darker enemy that the ghost of Kiev was back in the game. And this enemy didn't use lawsuits, they used hitmen. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime slicker. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom ambush. Elena Kovac was no longer wearing a waitress uniform. She sat in a corner office on the 50th floor, surrounded by 3 monitors glowing with spreadsheets, flowcharts, and redacted bank records. Her life had changed, but her anxiety hadn't. It had just shifted shape. Instead of worrying about the electricity bill, she was worrying about the shadowy web of shell companies owned by Brockton Enterprises. Preston walked in, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. He threw a newspaper onto her desk. "Page 4, he said, his voice void of emotion. Elena looked down. A small headline in the Metro section read, "Local attorney found dead in apparent suicide." It was Gavin Mercer. Found in his upscale apartment. Overdose. Elena felt a cold chill run through her veins. "He didn't kill himself," she whispered. "He was too vain. Men like Gavin don't take pills. They flee to non-extradition countries." "I know," Preston said, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter in the corner. His hand shook slightly. "Brockton is cleaning house. They know we stopped the North Creek deal. They know someone figured out the toxic liability clause. Gavin was the loose end." He turned to face her. "Elena, you need to stop digging. This isn't corporate rivalry anymore. This is a hit list." Elena stood up, walking to the window. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked glass. "If I stop, they win. And men who kill their own lawyers don't stop because you surrender. They stop when you break their legs. We are financiers, Elena, not mobsters," Preston shouted, slamming his glass down. "I move numbers on a screen. I don't dodge bullets. I have private security, sure, but these people... Brockton is backed by foreign capital. Dark capital." "I know," Elena said calmly. "I found the source." She turned the monitor toward him. On the screen was a complex diagram she had spent nights building. It linked Brockton Enterprises to a holding company in Cyprus, which linked to a bank in Latvia, which linked back to a name that made Elena's blood run cold when she first found it. Victor Hale. Hale? Preston squinted at the screen. "The shipping magnate? He's a philanthropist. He's on the board of the Met." "He is a ghost," Elena corrected. "In my country, he was known as the Butcher of Odessa. He made his fortune seizing ports during the collapse of the Soviet Union. He didn't just buy the competition, he sank their ships, literally." Elena walked over to Preston. "Brockton is just a front. Hale is trying to buy the land in upstate New York, not for servers and not for conservation. The geological surveys show rare earth mineral deposits deep beneath the toxic waste. Lithium, cobalt, billions of dollars worth. He needs the land, and he needs you out of the way." Preston sank into the leather sofa, looking defeated. "So what do we do? Go to the FBI? If Hale is this powerful, he has friends in Washington." "The FBI takes years," Elena said. "We don't have years. We have days." Her phone buzzed on the desk. It wasn't her work phone. It was her personal cell, the cheap prepaid one she kept for Maya's doctors. She picked it up. A text message from an unknown number. There was no text, just an image. Elena gasped, dropping the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor. Preston rushed over. "What? What is it?" He picked up the phone. The image was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. It showed the playground of a public school in Queens. In the center of the frame, sitting on a swing, was a little girl with curly hair and a nebulizer mask around her neck. Maya. And drawn over the picture, in crude red digital ink, was a target circle. "Oh my God," Preston breathed. Elena snatched the phone back, her hands trembling so violently she could barely hold it. The panic of the mother hijacked the logic of the lawyer. "I have to go. I have to get her. I have to leave." She started grabbing things blindly. Her coat, her purse. "I quit, Preston. I can't do this. I thought I could fight them, but not with her. Not with Maya." She ran for the door. "Elena, stop!" Preston blocked her path. "Move!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "They know where she goes to school. They are watching her." "Exactly!" Preston grabbed her shoulders, shaking her hard. "If you run now, where do you go? Back to your apartment in Queens? To a motel? Do you think you can hide from a man like Victor Hale in a Motel 6? If you run, you are defenseless. You are dead." Elena went limp, sobbing into his chest. "I can't lose her. She is all I have." Preston held her, his expression hardening. The shark was waking up. He had spent his life accumulating power for vanity. Now he had a reason to use it. "You won't lose her," Preston vowed. "I have a security team, ex-Mossad, the best in the business. We are going to pull Maya out of school right now. She's going to stay at my estate in the Hamptons. It's a fortress. Gated, armed guards, surveillance." He pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "I am not letting them touch a hair on her head. But you have to promise me one thing." Elena wiped her eyes, sniffing. "What?" "We don't run," Preston said. "We finish this. Tonight is the Winter Solstice Charity Gala. Victor Hale will be there. He thinks he's scared us into submission. He thinks you're just a terrified waitress, and I'm a cowardly banker." Preston straightened his tie. "We are going to that party, and we are going to look him in the eye, and you are going to tell me exactly how to destroy him." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered with old money and new secrets. Elena Kovacs was no longer the invisible waitress. Tonight, styled by Preston's team, she was weaponized elegance. She wore a midnight blue silk gown that moved like liquid armor, her hair swept up to reveal diamonds at her throat. But her most dangerous accessory was her eyes, cold, calculating, and scanning the room. Preston offered his arm as they entered. "Breathe," he murmured. "Maya is safe. My head of security is watching her in the safe room. Focus on the target." "I am not nervous about Maya," Elena said, her voice low. "I am nervous because I see him." Across the room, Victor Hale held court near an ice sculpture. He was a bear of a man, laughing loudly with a cigar in hand, looking every bit the untouchable billionaire. He stopped mid-laugh when he saw Preston approaching. "Preston?" Hale smirked, his eyes darting dismissively over Elena. "I heard about your personnel issues. Tragic about your lawyer." "Tragic, yes," Preston replied smoothly. "But fortunately, I found a superior replacement." He stepped aside. Elena moved into the light. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice steady, "it is a pleasure to finally meet the majority shareholder of Red Star Logistics." The air left the immediate circle. Hale's smile vanished. Red Star was the shell company he had used to smuggle weapons in the 90s, a secret buried under decades of forensic accounting. "I don't know what you're talking about, my dear," Hale said, his voice dropping an octave. "Stick to looking pretty. It suits you better than thinking." Eleanor stepped into his personal space, invading the boundary of his arrogance. "My algorithm traced the indemnification clause, Victor," she whispered, ensuring only he and Preston could hear. "I know about the lithium. But that is boring. What is interesting is the transfer order I found for the incident in Kiev 10 years ago. The car bomb meant for the Deputy Minister of Energy." Hale froze. The champagne glass in his hand tilted dangerously. "The Deputy Minister survived," Elena hissed, her trembling rage masked by a veneer of ice. But his wife disappeared. She ran to America. She became a waitress, and she waited. Hale stared at her with genuine horror. The color drained from his face. You are Kovach's wife. You are dead. I am very much alive, Elena said, and I have sent an encrypted data packet to the International Criminal Court. If anything happens to me, my daughter, or Mr. Calloway, the encryption key releases automatically. It was a bluff, a massive, terrifying bluff. She had the files, but not the decryption key. If he called her on it, they were dead. Hale looked at his bodyguards, then back at the woman in the blue dress. He calculated the risk. You are playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Kovach. I learned from the best, she replied. Hale glared at Preston. You are protecting a ghost, Calloway. This will burn you. I like the heat. Preston smiled tightly. Now, if you'll excuse us. Preston guided Elena away. They didn't look back until they reached the privacy of the stone balcony. The moment they were out of sight, Elena's knees buckled. Preston caught her, holding her upright against the railing. I don't have the key, she gasped, hyperventilating. It was a lie. If he checks, if he calls his tech team. He won't check tonight, Preston assured her, though his own heart was racing. You bought us time. No, a voice came from the shadows. He will check. They spun around. One of Hale's bodyguards stepped out of the darkness. He held a silenced pistol, but he didn't raise it. He looked older than the other muscle, with a scar running down his cheek. By morning, Victor will know you lied, the gunman said with a heavy Russian accent. And he will send us to the Hamptons to kill you. Preston stepped in front of Eleanor. Name your price. I'll double it. The gunman shook his head. He holstered the weapon and looked directly at Elena. I do not want your money. Mrs. Kovach, do you not remember me? I was the driver, in Kiev, the day of the bomb. I was the one who pulled your husband from the wreckage. Elena covered her mouth, a sob escaping. Dmitri? He is alive, Elena, Dmitri said softly. The world stopped spinning. The sounds of the gala faded into white noise. What? She whispered. Victor told you he died so you would run, Dmitri explained quickly. He wanted the assets. But your husband, Andrei, he is alive. He is in a private prison in Siberia. Victor keeps him there as leverage. Dmitri looked at Preston. Victor knows you are here. He will not stop, but I can help you. I know where the server is. The physical server with the original, unencrypted evidence. It is the only way to trade for Andrei's life. Where is it? Preston asked. It is on his yacht, the Titan, Dmitri said. Docked at Pier 59, but it leaves for international waters in 2 hours. Preston looked at Eleanor. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a desperate, blinding hope. My husband is alive, Eleanor said, gripping Preston's arm. Preston, please, help me get him back. Preston looked at the desperate woman who had saved his company, and then at the defecting guard. He realized this was no longer about business. Let's go, Preston said, tapping his earpiece. Team Alpha, meet us at the side exit. Prepare for extraction. We're going to the docks. He looked at Dmitri. You drive. The rain had turned into a deluge by the time the black SUV screeched to a halt at Pier 59. The Titan loomed in the dark water, its engines already humming with a low, vibrating growl. The gangway was retracting. The gap between the dock and the yacht was widening. We missed it, Preston cursed, gripping the door handle. No, Dmitri said from the driver's seat. He grabbed a flare gun from under the dashboard. Not if we make them stop. He leaned out and fired a red magnesium flare directly onto the deck. It wasn't an attack. It was a distraction. As the crew scrambled to extinguish the blinding fire, Preston's tactical team, following in a second car, sprinted for the maintenance ladder on the hull. Stay here, Preston ordered Eleanor. No, she said, kicking off her heels and tearing the slit of her gown for movement. I am the only one who knows the password. Preston saw the fire in her eyes, the same defiance that had faced him in the restaurant. He nodded. Stay close. They moved fast. Dimitri led the way, knowing the ship's layout from a life he tried to forget. They descended into the belly of the yacht, bypassing the chaos on the upper decks. The corridors were narrow, lined with teak and gold. Engine room left, servers right, Dimitri whispered. 2 guards. Preston stepped around the corner before Dimitri could stop him. Hey, you can't park this thing here, he shouted, feigning a drunken stumble. The guards hesitated, confused by the tuxedo-clad billionaire. That split second was all the security team needed to silence them. Elena rushed into the server room. It was freezing, filled with the hum of cooling fans and blinking blue lights. Which rack? Preston asked. None of them, Elena said, dropping to her knees near a heavy floor mat. She threw it aside to reveal a bolted safe. Hale is paranoid. He keeps his leverage air-gapped. Can you open it? Dimitri asked, watching the door. Elena stared at the keypad. He uses dates, not birthdays. He doesn't care about people. He cares about power. She closed her eyes, remembering the night the Soviet Union collapsed. The night men like Hale carved up a country for spare parts. She typed in the sequence. 12/26, 1991, 0. The light turned green, the hydraulics hissed, and the safe popped open. Inside lay a single, ruggedized hard drive. I have it, Elena whispered, clutching it to her chest. I have Andre. Suddenly the ship's alarm blared, a deafening, rhythmic klaxon. They know, Dimitri shouted. Move, to the stern. They sprinted back through the corridors, the sound of heavy boots thundering on the stairs above. They burst onto the rear deck, the rain lashing their faces. 10 feet below, a speedboat bobbed in the violent wake, piloted by one of Preston's men. Jump! Preston yelled. Elena threw the drive to the pilot and leaped into the dark void. The cold water hit her like a hammer, but she surfaced, gasping, and was hauled onto the boat. Preston landed next to her, soaking his tuxedo. Dimitri! Elena screamed, looking up. The driver wasn't jumping. He stood at the railing, jamming the deck door with a steel pipe as guards pounded on it from the inside. Go, Elena! Dimitri shouted over the storm. Save him! No! Preston held her back as the speedboat roared to life. We have to go. If they catch us, it was all for nothing. As the boat sped away toward the lights of Manhattan, Elena watched Dimitri's silhouette disappear into the rain. She clutched the hard drive, shivering not from the cold, but from the cost of their victory. 3 days later, the headline on the New York Times shattered the financial world. The Hale papers, shipping magnate indicted for international arms trafficking. But Eleanor wasn't reading the paper. She stood in the arrivals hall of JFK International Airport, wearing jeans and a sweater. She wasn't the wolf in the black dress today. She was just a wife. Preston stood a few feet away. He had used the drive to broker a quiet deal with the State Department and Russian authorities, the evidence in exchange for one prisoner. The sliding glass doors opened. Passengers flowed out. Tourists, business travelers. Then, a man in a wheelchair appeared, pushed by an attendant. He was gaunt, his hair prematurely grey, but his eyes were sharp and kind. Andre, Elena whispered. She ran, crashing into him, falling to her knees to bury her face in his neck. Elena, he rasped, his hand trembling as he touched her hair. My Elena. Behind her, a little girl with curly hair peeked out from behind Preston's legs. Maya, Elena wept, waving her daughter over. Come meet Papa. Preston watched the family reunite, a lump in his throat. He had closed billion-dollar deals, but nothing felt as significant as this. He turned to leave, giving them their moment. Preston, Elena called out. He stopped. She looked at her husband, then at the man who had helped save him. Thank you. Preston smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. See you on Monday, partner. 6 months later, Le Miroir was bustling. Preston Calloway sat at table 4, but he wasn't sitting with a nervous lawyer or a sycophant. He was sitting with a woman in a tailored white suit who was reviewing a merger on her tablet. The Brockton acquisition is finalized, Elena said, scrolling through the data. We stripped the toxic assets and funded the clean energy division. Callaway Kovach Holdings is now the state's largest landowner. Excellent, Preston said. And the respiratory clinic? Fully funded, Elena said, looking up. Maya finished her treatment yesterday. The doctors say her lungs are clear. That, Preston said, raising his glass, is the best return on investment I've ever seen. A young waiter approached the table. He was new, his hands shaking slightly as he presented the wine bottle. Good afternoon, the waiter stammered, his accent heavy. Would you like to taste? Preston looked at the waiter. He saw the fear. He saw the cheap shoes. He looked at Elena. Elena turned to the young man. She didn't look through him. She looked at him. Take your time, she said gently. And don't worry about the label. We know it's good. What is your name? Matteo, ma'am. Well, Matteo, Elena said, pointing to the empty chair next to Preston. When your shift is over, bring your resume to the office on the 50th floor. We are looking for people who work hard. The waiter's eyes went wide. Really? Really, Preston added, swirling his wine, but only if you can read upside down. As Matteo walked away beaming, Preston and Eleanor clinked their glasses. They were the kings and queens of New York now, but they never forgot that in the game of power, the most dangerous piece on the board is the pawn that refuses to fall. And that is how Elena Kovach went from pouring wine to owning the vineyard. It's a powerful reminder that intelligence doesn't have an accent, and dignity isn't defined by a paycheck. Preston Calloway thought he was mocking a servant, but he was actually auditioning his future partner. This story reminds us that everyone you meet has a battle you know nothing about, and a potential you can't imagine. So next time you see someone struggling to speak your language, remember Elena. They might just be the smartest person in the room. If you enjoyed this story of justice, redemption, and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you found that contract? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.